To kick things off, do you want to give people a little bit of background? Who are you? What is TaskMagic?
So, born into nothing. Trailer park. Do you have trailer parks over there? You know what that is?
Yeah, I know what it is, but no, we don't really have that kind of thing over here.
All right. So yeah, trailer park, poor, broke, became an entrepreneur out of necessity. And when I was like 10, 11 years old, I started a sales club that was called like Olympia Sales Club. And I got $3 for every item that I sold out of this magazine.
Yeah.
And when it got too much for just me to handle, I hired my stepbrother and a neighbor kid, and I gave them $1 for every item that they sold. And I took $2. So you're not thinking like how someone intuitively scaling a sales org, right? Like at 11. Yeah. And you don't know. I didn't know what the word product market fit or scale was until I was like 26 or 27.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know what these terms meant. I became this out of necessity because I grew up with nothing and like we couldn't afford a trip to Disney World.
Yeah.
Like this was something that was like that I wanted to do. That was a driver for me. And like fast forward a little bit, I felt so disconnected with technology because again, like I graduated high school in like 2006. So internet was aplenty all over the place. And like we didn't have it until I was like a senior in high school. I remember having to go over to like friends' homes to illegally download music off of LimeWire. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
So, again, like I always felt this disconnection with technology. So I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I could sell. I just didn't have that tech background, right? So I had to learn that piece. And I went off to uni and at Michigan State. And even then I had to go to I had to start from the bottom, which was like a community college thing. Okay. So like it took me 6 years to get a 4-year degree. And because I wasn't really motivated by it, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But growing up with nothing, you kind of think like, what are the stable things? You kind of do. It's this weird dichotomy where you're like, all right, I got to get like this piece of paper. I know it will help me. I know it was something that always drove me. And so first person in my entire family to go to college. And then I kind of like chased a paycheck. I feel like at working at the top places to launch your career lists, because again, growing up with shit, you're like, all right, like I need a good paycheck. And I didn't really have the idea for like my tech entrepreneur background.
Yeah, I think it's important to not rush that as well, right?
Yeah, right. So often people rush it and are like, I just want to be an entrepreneur. And it's like, no, dude, there's so much experience to be gained in the fuckery of like this stuff that like people do. Like the experience, there's no bad experience ever. You can learn from just as much from a good experience as you can from a bad experience, right? And so on and so forth, and everything in between. Yeah. So, like I worked for like a top public accounting firm, like one of the big 4 accounting firms. Like I worked for this company, essentially got fucking fired in 8 months. Like this was not working out, right? Yeah. Like this thing. So, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this form of business much. And then I started working for like the movie studios in Los Angeles in some consulting capacity. And that was really fun for a little while. And then I ended up getting fired from that job. And then this pattern started to emerge. Where like, all right, why are you so horrible working for other people? Like, well, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And it just became like, cool. So now you're 26-ish and you haven't worked for a startup. You haven't done these things. You haven't had this idea. Maybe it's time to force the issue a little bit, And so I was like, all right, I don't have the idea still, right? Because I'm not going to run with just any dumb idea.
Yeah.
And like you said, having the patience. But I worked for my first venture-backed company in Santa Monica. And they had raised like $1 million in venture capital. This was back in 2013, 14. Yeah. So like where $1 million raise was like really good.
Yeah.
I was the ops manager and I was learning tech. And I remember, I'll never forget this feeling. The first week there, I organized the pay structure for 3,000 contractors across the country. And it was approved by the founders and I was employee like 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah.
And they were like amazing. And it was the first week that I was there, and I had presented this thing, and they approved it, and then it affected 3,000 people across the country.
Wow.
And you're like, what? Is this real? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because I just came from a consulting firm that like you had to do your line item on something and just stick to that and make tags. And you're like, no wonder why I was getting fucking fired. You know, like this is a drug. I was making a third of the money working for this startup that I worked for the consultant firm.
Yeah.
So like for me, that was always the thing. Fast forward like 6 months, that company went kind of out of business. And I was like, all right, but coming from that business, I learned that I had the idea now, and it was like a digital business card exchange. Okay. Simple. Keep in mind that this was 2015-ish now. So like it wasn't so prevalent, like these types of things.
Yeah.
And I was able to start that company, and not being an engineer myself, like I didn't know how to code, right? I didn't really know how to design. So I was like, okay. And I didn't really have the money to like afford anybody or any engineers. Yeah. And I played every game you could. Oh, go to co-founder dating and find a technical co-founder. Oh my God, what a waste of time. Like I found these early stage like no code tools, like just like WordPress. Yeah. Right. And all these plugins, and Zapier was around to connect some things then in 2015. But it was very early. Yeah. So like I started gluing all these things together, Typeform, WordPress, and it was like it was a WordPress website and 84 plugins. Wow. And I was able to cobble Joe these things together and pivot that company into like 14 different things and monetized at least 5 figures at a stage. Okay. So it was like a few $100,000 I was able to get. Yeah. And then that allowed me to hire my first engineer, and I went to like design school, like, and started working for like companies in like UX and UI design, and then kind of bringing all those skills together. And what came about from that was like a no code app builder. Okay. Like, and I go, cool, this is what I was meant to do. Yeah. Right. Going back to that 11-year-old kid who didn't have access to technology and who just cobble-joed some WordPress website and 84 plugins, like this no-code movement, the early no-code movement, this is so empowering. I want to share this with other people. I want to show other people like how empowering this is. Anyone, doesn't matter what you come from, what you look like, can have access to these tools. Yeah. Right? Like you can be a tech entrepreneur, like I am, and I'm human garbage. You know? So like it's funny that so many people make excuses, and it didn't take me. I was 20. I was not making, when I turned 30 years old, I'm 34 now. When I turned 30 years old, I was making $15 an hour. Yeah. Garbage. Like $15 an hour. So many people want to make $15,000 a month by 30. Like $15,000 a month by 23. And you're like, I didn't have any of my shit figured out. None of it. You know, so like the through line of my life has always been like, it's always taking longer than I want. Yeah. Right. And now I have a Tesla paid for in cash. So stay patient.
Yeah, it takes time to build the skills. It takes time to get the experience. It takes time to find what works and find out what doesn't work. And they're all stepping stones on the way, aren't they?